So yeah, what we're going to talk about now is cameras, Blackmagic cameras, Panasonic cameras, and I'm basically going to hand you over to Richard, who is more of a camera expert than me.
Okay. Right, I've got a small selection of cameras. As you probably heard earlier, I work for Holdan in the UK, and we're the distributor for both Blackmagic Design and for Panasonic Broadcast, as well as Grass Valley, Edius, and Data Video and Data Vision, and a bunch of other manufacturers as well. But I thought I'd bring a cross-section of cameras so you can have a look and a poke, and I can show you some footage from them up on the screen. So, in order, the Panasonic ones I've got here, I've got an HPX 250, which is a broadcast quality 3 sensor, 3 3/3" chip camera, which records onto P2 cards. These are the P2 cards. So this will record at 100 megabits, so full broadcast HD. And I've also got a little AC90, which is an AVC HD camcorder that can actually record up to 1080 50p. So a higher quality theoretically than this, because this is 1080i. This can do 1080 50p, but it's much more compressed onto SD cards, and this has got 2 slots for SD or SDXC cards, which will let you record either simultaneously to both cards, so you've got a backup copy you could give somebody, or relay record, so it finishes recording on one and then moves across to the other. So now they are different. Obviously, the cost of the media is hugely different between them. A 64 gig card for this will record 1 hour of quality and will cost you, getting on for 400 quid for 1 hour. But it is full broadcast quality. And the reason the P2 cards cost a lot more than SD cards is there's actually 4 times more memory on this than there needs to be, and a microprocessor which is constantly monitoring and checking it to make sure it's going to always keep your footage. When you press record on a P2 card, it's going to be there unless you drive a tank over it or you cock it up in some other way by deleting it without copying it off. And it has happened, that people have messed up, but in terms of bad cards, I've only ever heard of 1 P2 bad card in the whole history of Panasonic, in the sort of 5 or 6 years we've been dealing with them. So these cards are terribly robust. However, I'm sure anybody who records onto SD cards knows how often you can corrupt, you can screw up, you can lose data on an SD card. It does happen. So that's what you're paying for, and that's why it's slightly eye-wateringly expensive. But it's a lot cheaper than it used to be, because we've now got these things called micro P2 cards, which are about the size of an SD card, but they're still using the 4 times as much memory, the microprocessor control. It's still a more sophisticated system, but that has brought the cost down. So an hour used to be about 600 quid, and now it's edging down to sort of 300, 350 pounds. So the cards are getting cheaper for P2.
So you say you get an hour on a 64 gig?
Yeah.
At 100?
At 100 megabits. You get 2 hours on a 64 gig at 50 megabit.
No, on my 3100 I only get 72 minutes.
But you get 72 minutes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm building in some safety margins here. But at 100 megabits, it is about a gig a minute. So you get 64 at least. But
that's a DV Pro.
Oh, DVC Pro.
Yeah.
Oh, you shoot DVC Pro. Well, that's still 100 megabits. DVC Pro. Pardon?
50, isn't it?
Or you've got the choice. You can either shoot 50 or 100. But is that who you do shoot that for?
Sky Sport.
All right, I'd have thought there'd be 100 megabit.
No, they're going over to that, but at the moment they shoot 50.
Oh, right, Reuters shoot 50 megabit as well. But they're not DVC Pro. Reuters do AVC Intra at 50 megabits, which is actually an 8-bit codec rather than a 10-bit codec. So I'm not keen on it. I'd always want to shoot at 100 megabits. But broadcasters, they have their own workflows, and they have to, they have to stick to that because that's what they're expecting in and out. So. This little camera is much cheaper media. I bought a 32 gig SanDisk Extreme card the other day for £20. The best cards you could get, and they're coming down all the time now. I think about £40 or £50 you can get a good quality 64 gig, and there are 128 gig cards out for these. but it's never going to be broadcast or considered broadcast quality, and it's because it's so heavily compressed before you put it down onto the card. Now, broadcastable, yes, but broadcast quality, no. And it's also, this camera is a 3/4 inch chip, whereas this one's 3/3 inch chip, so it doesn't sound very much difference between a quarter and a third. But if you look at the bit of glass at the front, how much bigger the lens is, the sort of light capturing ability, everything else, you know, the glass lens on this bit probably costs as much as this camera. These are about 1,500 quid, Dave, would you say?
Yeah.
About 1,500 quid, whereas these are more like £4,000. So you get a difference between the two cameras. In terms of the pictures, in the first generation, when you're seeing a picture come straight off them onto a screen, there's not a huge difference between them. There's not a huge gulf. But when you go through a production chain, when you're actually applying color corrections, you know, editing, and then coming out of your edit with any color corrections or titles and everything else, and then going into a broadcast encoder, and then sending it through Freeview, and then coming out for your TV at home, by the time you've gone end to end through the whole chain, that's where you see a big difference between the picture from these camcorders. On your Blu-rays at home, it's going to be a lot less of a difference because it's only gone through one form of compression. So, as well as these two Panasonic cameras here, and of course there are a lot of other Panasonic cameras in the range, which I'm very happy to talk about. I've got two cameras from Blackmagic Design. Now, you've probably seen one of these before. I've got a big viewfinder on it. It's a bit risky holding it just by the viewfinder, isn't it? So this is a Blackmagic Cinema camera, a EF mount, so it takes Canon lenses, and this is the new Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera. Now these are very different to these two, obviously. You have to glance at them to see how different they are, but they only shoot 25p or 30p, so whereas these will shoot 50i, or in this case 50p, so you get lovely smooth motion. These are for a more cinematic look. These are for shooting 25p, you can shoot 24 or 30p, but they're for shooting more of the sort of style you'd use a DSLR for now. Does anybody shoot video on a Canon 5D or a camera like that? No, we're all proper video cameras. C100. Yeah, that's.
I shot on the C300.
Yeah, that's but you see the difference between these and a C300. This camera here, the EF mount, which records onto solid state drives. It records onto a solid state drive like this, and it will record an hour on a 500 gig drive at its top quality setting, or 5 hours of ProRes onto a 500 gig drive. This is at 25p, but this is. Hang on, I forgot where I was going now. I suddenly remembered it was being broadcast and panicked. Yeah, this records onto solid state drive, and it's either uncompressed cinema DNG format, which has 13 stops of dynamic range. So this will give a C300 or a C100, certainly a C100, but a C300 a run for its money in terms of the quality of the images it can produce. But fundamentally, these are 1,200 quid. And C300 is what, 10,000?
It's about that figure,
Yeah. So this is a fraction of the cost, but very much in the ballpark. I mean, I must admit, I'd rather use a C300 for going out and making a production on it. It's a proper camera. But at £1,200, this is really a remarkable achievement that Blackmagic have squeezed that much technology into something costing this much. And the C300 will record at 50 megabit.
Yeah.
This is recording 13 stops, 12-bit colour, raw format at 2,500 pixels. Well, it's about 2,400 by 1,300, so it's actually higher than HD quality. So it can do some astonishingly good pictures. And perhaps, David, if you want to put the picture. Here we go. Perfect. Can you play the one which is just to show dynamic range at heart? So, it's the one of my daughter, just there. Double click on one, Sophie. Right,
that's flat.
And so it shoots in a sort of log format, in a raw format. Yes. But you see, there's an awful lot of subtlety in the colour because it's 12-bit colour. There's a real subtlety about it. Have you got the one? There we go. And you notice this thing about dynamic range. We've got light streaming through the windows, it's broad daylight outside, and it's able to cope with the deep shadow. There's no artificial lighting here, deep shadow in this engine shed, and the bright sunlight coming through the window, and it hasn't lost any detail. And that is unusual in a camera costing £1,200, to put it mildly, in that huge dynamic range. And Arri Alexa is 23,000, well, the new Almira thing, or is that Nissan? But the new, an Arri Alexa, they named it. So the new Arri camera is about 23,000 and does 14 stops. This is 1,200 quid, and I think you'll agree it's got a different look to most video. This is before any grading on it. Now, Dave, perhaps you'll just richen up the colour, just pull up the colour for me and do nothing else. But you see, all that colour is there in the image. It's because it's raw, because the whole idea of filming raw is you can push it further in post-production. I could change the blue of the coat to a green with much more subtlety. You see how the red brick's really beginning to come through now, and the skin tone looks great. In fact, there's one shot which, have you got the one which has got the deep engine pit? If you go down there, that one, that's the one. Okay. Thank you very much. Right, so this really shows it. Do you want to play it, David? So you see how there's detail in the clouds and the sky up there, and there's detail in the pit, which is in full sort of winter shadow, and there's detail in that steam. So, you know, this is a £1,200 camera producing results like this. So, interesting cameras, but totally unsuitable for going out and shooting a wedding with, in my opinion, or going out and shooting actuality, things happening in front of you. And I recently did round the Island boat race, round the Isle of Wight. There is no way on earth I could get a good picture out of this while being thrown about a boat. I mean, you know, I've put this viewfinder on it because, you know, now I'm getting long-sighted. I'm having to hold it much further away in order to see pictures properly. And you've only got the screen on the back without that to focus. It's, you know, it's a good screen, but it was so reflective I had to have my coat over my head when I was filming this stuff out there. Even though you get a shade with it, you could actually shave in it in bright sunshine. So this is a camera for going out, setting up on a tripod or in a situation where you're totally in control of the scene. You're using the lens totally on manual. I'm adjusting the exposure, I'm adjusting the aperture on the lens. I'm doing everything manually. Whereas this is a camera, whereas in a difficult situation I could put it on autopilot, or I could certainly use it on manual iris and manual focus and get good results out of, but in crazy situations. So they're very different animals for different types of project. So
how about battery life?
Battery life, this will only last for about an hour and a half, the cinema camera. You really should have some extra sort of backup batteries. There are battery systems for using V-lock batteries or things that are used all day. Quite often people put these on a rig, so you've got bars underneath them, a map box on the front of it, a follow focus, so you can much more accurately control the focus on a lens like this. So when you see a camera that's sort of what's the word, pimped up effectively with all these different parts on it, that's when you get
expensive.
Yeah, exactly. So for £1,200 suddenly comes a lot more. If you want to put a shoulder rig on it and an extra, this viewfinder alone is about £1,000. It's about £900 or so. But I find it's incredibly useful to have a viewfinder in bright sunshine, almost essential to use something like that on it. So they're very different animals. So actually the base price of it, also this, we talked about P2 cards, you know, you get an hour on a 64 gig. And you just heard me say you get 1 hour on a 500 gig on this. However, a 500 gig SSD costs how much, Dave?
It's about 300, I think, these days.
Yeah, so the cost of those 500 gigs are coming down. Or you can choose to shoot in ProRes format, or Avid as well, Avid DMX, but ProRes format you'll get 5 hours on that 500 gig, costing about £300. So again, look, it's the subtlety of the image with the cinema cameras. It's a bit hard. To be honest, when I first used it, I was a bit freaked out by using the cinema cameras because I'm used to being able to set up a Panasonic camera to give me beautiful images straight off the camera without any color correction. You know, making my blacks look white, making the image, the colors look, you know, very realistic straight out of the camera. With the cinema camera, You don't even have an auto white balance. You choose a white balance. You choose 3200, 5600, 6500, 7200. So you have to know to get in the ballpark. But the reason you only have to get in the ballpark is there's so much control you can have over the image later. And the program David's using here, we'll come on to talk about in a minute, DaVinci Resolve, actually comes, the full version of it comes free with the larger cinema camera, and you get a free version which anybody now here could download for nothing, which will do up to 1920 1080 resolution, which is suitable for the other cameras. So
these ones I've just put a very quick look on them, so they're not coming out flat, so it's a bit more punchy, so it shows it off a bit better. But yeah, I mean, I did a project on this recently. I did a day's filming of a drama that we were doing, it didn't actually sound like a very good sales pitch, but actually it was not nearly as much of a pain in the neck as I thought it would be. In fact, it was actually really quite easy. I know Richard was saying it's not the sort of camera that you'd use for lots of different events, but actually filming it was pretty easy. You know, getting the exposure right didn't take that much effort, and I had a lot of range to play with it afterwards. The colour balance, didn't really have to worry too much about it, got it roughly right, but I could just sort of point it. I even used, like Richard, I struggled with a viewfinder, the screen. So I had the viewfinder, but a lot of the time I found I could just do it on the viewfinder, put up the peaking, which just outlines stuff, and I got perfect shots, and I actually did an awful lot of stuff very quickly, with a lot of range to play with it afterwards.
But of course, another problem, because they're only 25p, if you were doing sports or any event, you'd really want 50i or 50p shooting. And it means that you have to pan incredibly slowly so you don't get those sort of jerky pans, or do what's called a motivated pan, where you follow a bus across, otherwise the bus will sort of move like this. So it is a different animal, it's for that more cinematic feel.
And the lens, I mean, I was using a lens, some of the lenses didn't have image stabilization built in, so I'm so used to a camera with image stabilization built in, I'm suddenly using a camera, there's no image stabilization on the lens, and yeah, we did some handheld shots, they're a bit wobbly, we should have got a lens with image stabilizer, so yeah, there are differences about
So
it.
if you're using a Canon EF lens or
Yeah.
this thing?
Yeah.
The image stabilization actually comes on when you switch it on with this.
Right.
I mean, all of this stuff I shot with this lens, which is 17 to 55 2.8 zoom, which is, you know, it's a nice lens. It's about 700 quid's worth. So again, of course, you know, the 1,200 quid cost of that is not including a lens, so you've got to factor in a good lens to your budget, and probably a couple of good lenses, because one on its own might not be enough. The crop
Some hard
factor,
drives and a battery pack.
yeah, and yeah, exactly. So, and once you've added a rig, you're actually getting to the same price as one of these. To all the bits you might need around it, and of course, in order to edit this type of footage, which is very, very high bit rates at very, very good quality, you probably will need a new computer too, which might
Definitely. You definitely need a new computer.
and of course Macs are much better. No.
Macs are much less
Can you put
powerful.
PL lenses on it? Can you put an adapter?
Yes, you can. Yeah, you can put PL. There's something called a crop factor. With these cameras, which you have large sensors like this, there's something called a crop factor which you talk about when comparing it to how a full frame DSLR, like a Canon 5D Mark III, would see a lens. So the crop factor on this Blackmagic Cinema camera, and by the way, this is EF mount, Canon EF mount, but there's also a Micro Four Thirds mount version of this camera. The crop factor is 2.3, which means if I put a 20mm lens on this camera, which would be seen as 20mm wide lens on a Canon 5D, it's going to be the equivalent of a 46mm lens on this, so it's going to be punched in a bit. Now, it doesn't make it look like a 46mm lens, it just is looking at the centre of the image produced by this lens, like looking through a letterbox, because the lens is capable of projecting a big square of light or a big rectangle of light, but you've only got a smaller sensor in the centre of it. So its crop factor is like looking through a letterbox. And it does mean in order to get a wide lens on this camera, you need to go really wide, sort of 10mm, 7mm, you know, really wide lens to get that sort of epic landscape feel. But those lenses are available, and there are some very good ones which don't have too much vignetting, so or barrel distortion. So they are out there. The pocket camera is Blackmagic's newest camera, and this records onto very fast SD cards. But in order to record the best quality setting on this, you must have SanDisk Extreme Pro 95 megabits a second cards. Megabytes a second cards. You have to use these particular expensive cards. You can't use just any old SD card. In fact, even to do the ProRes, which is about 180, 190 megabits a second, this camera is recording data at twice the data rate of this broadcast HD camera onto P2 cards. So it's, again, workflows are very different. This isn't for going out and shooting events on. It's a really interesting little thing. Dave, can you pull up some footage from that? I've only done a few shots on this, but it'll give you an idea.
Any particular
If you do the shot of the window there. So this shows you again the dynamic range. I'm in a pretty dark room, bright sunshine outside, and you're seeing both. You're getting this incredible dynamic range. And this camera is about £650, sort of plus VAT, to give you results like this. And it uses micro four thirds lenses, so there are a huge amount of micro four thirds lenses out there in the market. This isn't a particularly good one. This is a 20mm f1.7 lens, which is about 200 and 250 quid. The plumb lens on this camera is actually a 12 to 35 with image stabilizer f2.8 lens. It's brilliant on this because the image stabilization is great because it's too small to hold steady. And if you're going to put a big cage and shoulder pads and things on this, it's stupid. You should get at least one of those and do it because it's for 600 quid extra. It's going to give you better results. This is for going and shooting in places you're not really meant to be, or for keeping in the glove box of your camera for that amazing sunset. Or it is, an amazing tool for that sort of thing. In fact, if you show the picture of Wolstonbury Hill, these are all pre-graded. That's why they look so flat. A bit further down. Show that with the people. I mean, this is muck-about footage. Perhaps can you put a bit of a grade on that? Give us a bit of contrast and get a bit of colour. And this was a really dull day, up a hill. This hill is as steep as it looks from there. It's like this. I climbed up with my little 4-year-old boy on my shoulders, and I had the camera in one pocket and I had the lens in another pocket. There he is, troublemaker.
So
and
that one.
Yeah, and we can give this some welly. So all the detail is embedded in that. So it's a bit more contrast, a bit more colour saturation. And even though this day was, it really was an awful day, you can see there's the ability just to improve it. You put a bit of sharpening on it. Because the image has so much detail.
I can see the TV through.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine.
You can get.
This is raw again, is it?
Yeah, this is raw.
No, this isn't.
Oh, sorry. Actually, this is 200 megabit ProRes. At the time I took this, it wouldn't shoot raw, but now it does. Now onto those special SD cards, you can shoot raw with it. It's a slightly different raw to the cinema camera here. It's compressed. It's 2:1 compressed raw, which I know is sort of a.
Contradiction.
It is, but that's what it's called. It's called optically lossless. Yeah, look at the detail exactly. And there really isn't much noise in here. The noise is created by the screen and the sort of detail on the background.
Put a bit of sharpness on that as
well. Yeah, you're right. Take a bit of that off because I'm getting too much. But you can see how far you can sort of put that better. Yeah, you can push the pictures. Now I really, I couldn't carry a tripod and any other camera up that hill, but if it had been sunny, it would have been glorious. In fact, if you show the shot of the white decorator's sheet on the floor, yeah, there you go.
Oh.
That's the one. Yeah. So double click that. Perfect.
What's
Now
the
this-
sound on that like?
Well, we'll come on to those things. Yeah, we'll come on to those. So that, again, that shows you the sort of exposure latitude you've got with a camera like this. That's pure sunshine. You can see into the corner. You can see into that. It's very different sort of images. So, buoyed up by my little mucking about with this, I took it to Lewis Bonfire Night, and actually I haven't got any of the footage loaded onto David's system here. But I found it was much harder to shoot without that lens. I don't actually own this 12 to 35 image stabilized lens. I was trying to use a Voigtlander lens, which was a 0.95 25mm, which on this has got a 2.9 crop factor. So my 25mm was like a 75mm lens. It was so I was, every tiny movement, it was like a telephoto, was exaggerated, and I find it very hard to use for getting footage like that. So I would strongly recommend, if you're looking at pocket cameras, get that 12 to 35 with the image stabilization, because I'm going to have to run everything through the EDIUS image stabilization shots, apart from the very firm ones and the ones I had after 2 pints, which amazingly for image stabilization, a couple of pints work very well. If anyone's been to Lewis for firework night, they go a bit mad there and there's bangers going off, right? It's amazing. I didn't realise I was doing it, but every time I bang it, because you see the camera jerk like this, is just a natural reaction. But so these are great, but if you're going to film your home movies on it, you've got to be very careful, how you set it up. Again, you're exposing manually. There is an autofocus, but it's not very good. It's not very quick to react, because it's these are stills lenses, not video lenses. So brilliant having a glove box. Brilliant for filming covertly. If you're filming on the London Underground or in the London Eye, places where you wouldn't be allowed to go with a camera normally, and it's getting harder and harder to go anywhere with a camera, you could get some amazing footage from one of these, and it really does look like a little point and shoot job, doesn't it? So they're all these cameras are very different, and I wouldn't, although David said he could go and shoot some things like this, I wouldn't dream of shooting a football match, because at 25p the footballers are going to be going jerking past the screen, and they're very different sort of cameras for different purposes, so do remember that. But these things are in very high demand at the moment. We aren't getting enough to fulfil the demand. You won't probably see one till beginning of New Year, maybe even February, if you order one now, because there's such a long waiting list for them. And
it was the same with the cinema cameras, but you can get those now.
The cinema cameras now are available from stock. Oops, his head falling over. The cinema cameras are available from stock, but these are going to take a lot longer to get one of these, because there's been such a sort of unprecedented demand. Really didn't expect so many people to want a pocket cinema camera. Should have known different. This, incidentally, will take batteries which you can change. So it takes these Nikon batteries. You can buy these for £15–20 on eBay. So you can have lots of those, which is just as well, because they last about an hour at the most. So you need to have a bucket of these to replace. And some of the places these are being used, I went to, there was a recent BBC show for UAVs, these sort of unmanned aeroplanes, which are drones flying cameras. And of course this is perfect because it's lightweight, it's a lot better than a GoPro. You put much better lenses on it, and it records at much higher bit rates, which will just go straight into a production chain. So they're looking at flying these on remote control helicopters, remote control planes, to get some really incredibly cinematic pictures on a really lightweight, from a lightweight camera platform. And these cameras, again, people are actually making feature films with these because of the quality it can produce. Now, these, as I say, more ENG, news gathering, situations where you're not in control, journalism, I would much rather go and shoot something I'm intending to end up on YouTube or wherever on something like this. I will get better results than I will with one of the pocket cinema cameras. Ultimately, because it's a much more flexible camera for changing things fast. It's much easier to hold without any sort of rig. I can hold this much more steadily. This camera's got an amazing image stabilization system, which means even if I'm rocking backwards and forwards as well as moving up left, it will give me rock solid pictures. Whereas even with a lens with image stabilization, you're not going to get the same sort of steadiness out of something like this. So, horses for courses.
Let's ask a question.
On the lower price of the Panasonic,
Yeah.
I saw a review on YouTube, and one of the niggles they had was this pull-out LCD screen, which looked very fiddly, and I imagine it broke rather easily.
Well, I don't think we've got any back which are broken so far.
Right.
I think it's like, you're right. I'd say of the whole camera, it's probably the weakest link because it's the thinnest sort of bit that moves. But I don't know of any we've got back through that, and we've sold probably hundreds of these now. They've been very, very popular. And if the worst came to the worst, you've also got a viewfinder,
Yeah.
which is actually very good. And I tend to, outdoors, I always use it like that, partly to get that third point of stability. Because like that, I'm much, much more stable than, you know, any other way using a flip-out screen. So, you know, I wouldn't say that's an argument. In fact, talking about negatives on cameras, both these cameras have got XLR for audio. Both of them come with long, high-capacity rechargeable batteries. Whereas we've talked about the sort of battery life you'll get out of the Blackmagic cameras, you know, an hour. The battery built into this will only last 1 hour. And you need a sort of external power supply to power it for longer than that. But audio side, the Blackmagic Cinema camera and the Pocket camera both have a bit of an Achilles heel. You can't see any audio levels while you're recording, or in fact before you're recording. There's no audio levels on it. You can change the level, but you'd have to have a sort of a meter, an SQN mixer, something so you know exactly what's going into it. You'd have to do a bit of trial and error to make sure you're getting the right results on sound on both these cameras. So with this one, we've only got 3.5 stereo mini jack, so no balanced sound. With this one, we have got balanced sound, but it's going through 1/4-inch jack rather than through nice robust XLR. So on the sound side again. Now the reason is, you know, the same reason I came to before. This is a cinema camera. A lot of people are going to be recording their audio separately in the sort of environment this is intended to use. Whereas these things, you've got XLR mics we can put on, they've both got built-in mics which are actually pretty reasonable quality to start with, but you'd certainly want to use a better mic for getting anything good out of it. So very different animals for different purposes.
The other Panasonic, is that 50p you say?
Yeah, this one will record at 1080 50p.
And can that be edited in?
It can, but you can't do a lot with it after.
Well, that's what I
But you've
remember
got it
David saying
shot,
that.
that's right. You can't make a Blu-ray at 1080 50p, for instance.
No.
You can make it at 50i. But you know it's very good for doing slow motion on, because instead of 25p, which would be jerky, 50p is smooth. Interlace, if you do a slow motion at 50i, it normally does a half resolution. So although it's lovely to get the smooth motion of interlace, because it's in the every other field, you're getting a lower res slow-mo. But with this, you slow this down, it looks really, really nice. So some advantages like that to shooting 50p. This camera does have a what's called a variable frame rate mode. But like other Panasonic at the moment, if that variable frame rate only works at 720, so you can shoot 720 sort of 2 frames a second, 4 frames, 6 frames, 8 frames, right up to 60 frames a second. And that variable slow-mo is used a lot in wildlife and against sports, I guess. You might want to shoot with that. But if you do shoot variable frame rate with this, there's no audio. You don't get any audio, so gotcha when you're trying that.
What's the viewfinder like on that? What's the resolution?
I can't remember in pixels. Have a look. It's the easiest way. In fact, anybody who wants to have a play with either of these, sort of feel the weight, feel how easy it is to break the flip-out screen.
Please don't try to break the
How does it compare with, say, the little Panasonic up there, which costs half the price?
That one, I think you'll get much better image quality out of this. Much easier to use any of the manual features. It's got both these cameras have 3 rings for iris, zoom, and focus. So immediately you don't have to go into a menu to change for iris, zoom, and focus. With this, you'll be going to menus to do anything manually on it.
You were comparing that camera with this one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is a very good camera as well, isn't it?
That's
X900, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very nice domestic camera.
Yeah.
This is probably a little wider. Goes from about 30mm.
It's got a bigger lens on it. I mean, there's lots of other reasons why it'll be better pictures, but
and of course the XLR audio. So there's lots of reasons. And if you just feel how robust this is made, apart from the battery, if you sort of get a feel for both of them, they're designed for very different uses. And frankly, if you're charging for a job, turning up with something like this, is not embarrassing. Turning up with something like that, or indeed turning up with something like this, is slightly embarrassing. This I've been very busy with this camera lately, as well as flying them on drones. I've been at the BBC Natural History Unit because they found they couldn't cut the little lipstick cameras which they're using for shoving down ant hills and for sort of filming in the jungle, where they're using smaller cameras in difficult circumstances. They couldn't cut stuff from the traditional video cameras with the Red Epic they're now shooting a lot of their footage on. They're using much more expensive cameras for these wildlife productions. And whereas because of this sort of look of the images, this much more filmic look, this would cut fine with much more expensive cameras. So they've been using it. The latest, the latest BBC things coming out next year will have some shots from these little cameras in them. So
minimum 4K, haven't they now?
yeah, that's right. This isn't 4K. This is only 2K, but not 2K. It's 1920 1080.
Might be the battery's going down, is it?
Which one's that?
Flashing red light.
Oh right, yeah, that's probably. It might be.
Quite warm.
Yeah, just at the end. I hadn't charged it before I came because I've been using it on mains. So different sort of cameras for different sort of jobs, and after you've shot on it, you'll have different sort of things you have to do to get that footage ready. Now the footage from this one and that one from the HPX 250, and I've totally forgotten the name of that one.
AC90.
AC90. The footage from those will be able to use straight away in pretty much any software out there on the market. The exception is Avid doesn't really like ABC HD footage, so Avid will take it, but it probably needs to transcode it across to work nice and smoothly with it. But you don't need to do anything with the footage. The footage created by the cinema cameras, especially the raw stuff, you need to sort of pre-process, or you need to work on before you can use it. But that's where the benefit lies in a lot of ways. It's where you get this extra latitude. It's the reason you shoot RAW on your stills camera is so you get extra latitude. So you've almost got room to cover your mistakes, or you've got the creative potential to push it further. And that's exactly the same shooting RAW on these things. You need to do some extra work to make it useful, but because of that, you've got more creative control over the image.